place where you sit or stand. And we're going to, well, actually, before we begin the scripture reading, let me just say welcome to DC3's Sunday Outreach Service. If you are a guest with us, this is a little taste of what we do together as a church, our life together. And after the sermon today, someone will come up and explain a little bit more. But this time we're going to sing some songs together and do some scripture. And yeah, let's go ahead and join these couple people. If you're able, go ahead and stand. And Heather is going to come up and open with a scripture passage for us.
This is 1 Peter 1:13 through 16. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Discipline yourselves. Set all your hope on the grace that Jesus Christ will bring you when he is revealed. Like obedient children, do not be conformed to the desires that you formerly had in ignorance. Instead, as he who called you is holy, be holy yourselves in all your conduct. For it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy.
Be thou my Peter 1:17-21. Since you call on a Father who judges each person's work impartially, live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. For you know that it was not with perishable things, such as silver or gold, that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him, so that your faith and hope are in God.
This song is so one of us individually will sing a verse, and then the congregation, everyone else, respond with the chorus that we will have just learned.
I lift up my soul.
then kids that are 5 and under are dismissed to the nursery.
Receive your word and let it change our lives. Okay, so we're going to start today with a little competition. Now, I know I don't usually say things like this, but I learned something very valuable from Jason. and what I learned from Jason is the word voluntold. And what voluntold means is that if I ask for volunteers and you don't volunteer, beware because you may be voluntold. So I need volunteers. I need 3 or so volunteers for a competition. Riley, Shelby, yeah, sibling rivalry. That's what we need, Micah. All right, the 3 of you, sorry other people, but yes, I'm going to tape you to it. That's a brilliant idea. No. Okay, now, before we start this, there's no objecting to the measurements and standards of this competition because it's been approved by the International Olympic Committee. So no arguing or you will be disqualified. Now, this is a pretty simple competition. The primary goal of which is to not tip this over and damage a bunch of equipment. But the goal is to jump and reach as high as you can. That is the goal. One jump, One jump. One touch. And we will measure each person. So why don't we go... No, you don't get to stand on that. Although that would illustrate a whole different point. But anyway, we'll pass that for now. All right, Micah, why don't you go first since you volunteered? Okay, now, we're going to say it's like there because, as I said, very accurate, scientific. Now, I've got these stickers to represent each of you. We're going to do the dog licking the girl. Definitely sounds like Micah. Dog licking girl. And we'll say it's there even though I totally forgot where it was. So, okay.
I'll do it again.
No! Okay, all right. Next up, we have Shelby. Okay, that's higher. We're going to do the rocket ship. Now, I'm actually short, so I can't reach any of these. We'll say the rocket ship's there. Now here's the problem before you go, Riley. I want you to be strategic about this because think about this. You have to live with Shelby. So consider carefully how high you want to jump exactly. Go ahead. Okay, fine, you beat yourself. Right there. Dog that needs a bath. Excellent. Now, oh no, Riley, you're not done. You're not done, Riley. Now, as a reward for being so successful in life, and you get the chair of honor. So, you get the chair of honor. And along with the chair of honor, you also get to relax in comfort. If you have any neck trouble, now that reclines and it has arms. It's really the best seat in the house, I have to say. Now, there's no possible way I won't knock this over if it's near me, so I'm going to move it away from me. But we want to see the awesome achievements, so maybe that way. Okay. If I had control over wandering around while I talk, then maybe it'd be safer, but... So today, we're going to talk about James again. Last week, we talked about some of James that refers to faith. And we talked about how faith is only made complete or mature when it's accompanied with trusting action, with action that trusts that God will create a good solution when he commands us to do things. This week we're going to talk about favoritism. Most of you know Sarah Susager. She was our housemate for a while, lived with us, and one of the things that I picked up from her that was one of my most enjoyable things was the phrase first world problems. I think that is one of the most brilliant phrases ever. So if you guys don't know what first world problems are, it's when people in the quote-unquote first world, which is theoretically rich countries, complain about things that are really not that big a deal. And so there's long lists of them, and they create memes and whatnot. I think one of the first world problems is internet issues, when the internet is inconsistent or doesn't have good coverage. One I think about from Beth Ann is, yes, Beth Ann, is the time that she ate so much candy at a party that her mom and dad weren't at, that she came home and complained of a stomach ache. Now that really sounds like a really good complaint. You know, the only people who complain about feeling bad because they eat too much are people who don't worry about eating, who have enough food. Obesity is in a lot of ways a first world problem because, again, it's hard to complain about obesity when you're eating something small once a day. It's just not really a complaint you have. Another thing that sort of relates is car insurance is expensive. Gas is expensive. Oh my goodness, we're so, we don't have money, especially when we go through different times in life and we're really scraping the bottom. It's a luxury to not be able to afford gas. So the phrase first world problems, especially when accompanied by something ridiculous in a picture, is in my mind a wonderful, wonderful encapsulation of some of the problems we have with gratefulness. We're talking to James about the idea of favoritism, and along with favoritism, and the reason that my mind went to first world problems is I can't even say that word. See, here's the problem. This is a total tangent, but so normally when I'm going to preach and I have to sing first, I just mouth the words because I want to save my voice for talking. So that's what I normally do when I'm preaching. The problem is that last song, I like that song too much, so I sang it, and now my voice is already weary. So thanks a lot, Ryan Apple. I blame you. Okay. So I was looking into this idea of favoritism, but in our culture in the news, we talk a lot about, or it's thrown around a lot, this idea of privilege. And of course, there's usually something attached to privilege. White privilege, what else? Male privilege is the other big one. And it can be all sorts of other things. But I ran across a paper which was talking about this idea. It was talking about it in terms of white privilege, but it was saying that it's too broad of a term. It's a term that is useful, but it's not useful when you actually start to talk about what exactly is happening and why. And so one of the points that it made was something that I thought was insightful, as humans go. And so this should be our first slide. So privilege. So there's actually 3 different kinds of privileges. So the first one is advantages that everyone should have. And I just have to say that if I had to pick a group that has been abused the most throughout the most eras of history in places and time, I'm pretty sure that women beat every other group as far as having the short end of the stick. And if you don't believe me, then we can argue about history later. We think we should take away from some people and give to other people. These are advantages that some people have and some people don't. And the goal is for everyone to have it, not just some people. It's not about changing who has these privileges. It's about making it so that everyone has them. In a courtroom, male, this is hopefully not too much right now, but in other parts of the world and in history, the idea that the testimony of a woman doesn't count as much as the testimony of a man. That there is a sort of overruling effect. And it's not something that everyone should have, it's something that no one should have. No one should have an advantage or a leg forward in terms of the court, in terms of that. Like if I break the law, but because of me being a man, I don't get punished for it. That's not necessarily an advantage that we want to just give to everybody. It's an advantage we want to stop giving to some people. There's probably better examples of that, but anyway. And the last one. So, advantage as far as like structures of inequality and injustice. If you erase all that and you start brand new with a society where the first 2 kinds of advantages don't exist, right? That people don't have those things. You're still going to have advantages that are just because of how things are. They're natural, although that's a loaded word. Like for instance, in America, or let's make a hypothetical country like I don't know, Joe America. There you go, Joe America. In Joe America, 90% of the people are white and 10% of the people are black. Now, in that society, people are going to, the dominant society is going to be tailored to the 90%. Not because of injustice, but because of people tend to identify more with people who are like them in various ways. And that's not necessarily something that is evil or morally wrong. It's something that happens that is something perhaps to look out for, maybe to build things into society that might counter it, but it's not something where people are doing something wrong. It's an issue of numbers. I was talking with my cousin this week about India, a mission trip to he's a big dude. Like, he's tall, he's 6'3", but he's also big. He's a big, with surprise and a little bit of awe, just at how big of a guy he is. And he's not like, he's big, but he's not like NBA big or NFL big. But still, in that place, there are certain things that sort of are built around what most people are like, right? And those are not evil things, but they are something that can lead to privilege that isn't necessarily the best thing ever. So that's this idea of privilege. So we're going to read James and what? One of the situations in the book of James that is going on. So James chapter 2. My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here's a good seat for you, Riley, here's a good seat for you," but say to the poor man, "You stand there," or "Sit at the floor by my feet," have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Are they not the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of him to whom you belong? So in the book of James, there's situations where there's favoritism, and the favoritism is along the lines of wealth. As it has always been, wealth is not the only issue. It's a good way to summarize what the issue is, but it's, yes, you have money and property and things like that, but you also have influence, right? You also have a say in things. You have power. You have, if you go to the local police station and talk, you have money and influence and et cetera, et cetera. And so this privilege, this sort of privilege is baked into their culture. They're the ones who make the economy work. They're the ones who provide livings for people. They're the ones who are Roman citizens, perhaps, and have a greater say in sort of what's going on. And so we think about the different kinds of privileges that a wealthy person back then might have. And I think they fall into this idea of the advantages that everyone should have, but only they have, the advantages that no one has, but they have, and the advantages that are just kind of there. That they aren't really their fault. They aren't choosing it, but it's just kind of what happens. And if you think about what is going on in Rome, in the Roman Empire during that period of time, or if you think of other settings in the Bible, when Israel was still an independent nation and all those things, you can think of the different people who are privileged in different ways. Now, it tends to run along similar lines. Like, usually the people who are wealthy have influence in most places. But even beyond that, it can be any number of other things. today's purposes, apparently jumping high is enough to give you privilege. Now, I don't know if that chair is an advantage everyone should have, or if that chair is an advantage no one should have. But anyway, Shelby has her own opinions about the answer to that question. Oh, that was Micah. Micah. Oh, okay. I blame Shelby because I just assumed that. Never mind. Never mind. Moving on. But in our culture today, what are our markers? What do you need for success? I think there are parts of our culture that really do idolize wealth, right? They say it's all about how much money you make, right, and status and things like that. And we're not immune to that. But there's also this growing sort of sense of what it means to be a good person. And so what does our culture say that we need for success or privilege? I mean, privilege is a bad word nowadays, but what do we need to be, a well put together person? And so I'm going to kind of follow that trend of things, the thing that says maybe being wealthy is not the best thing in the world, although I think they secretly think it is. So here's 3 things that our culture says that we need for success. So number 1 is self-esteem. So self-esteem, not necessarily a bad idea, but how we get self-esteem, I think our culture has yet to come up with a good idea of how that works.
What is self-esteem?
Self-esteem is like the opposite of feeling bad about yourself all the time, or something along those lines. So I think you hear more about a bad self-esteem than you do about a good self-esteem. Yeah, how you feel about yourself. But like even putting it that way is hard for me to define because I don't agree that that's like a good category. And I don't think the Bible talks about self-esteem, even in like a Greek word for self-esteem. Like it doesn't use that category to explain that thing. But at the same time, there's truth there. As a country, and as I think worldwide, rates of depression are increasing, uses of antidepressants, and we have come to discover through things like, social sciences that feeling bad about yourself causes all sorts of things. And it's something that most people struggle with to some degree or another. And so we think about, we know that we're a little crazy. But our kids, surely we can figure out how to make our kids not feel bad about themselves. And so there are various strategies that are put out there for how to teach a person growing up to have self-esteem. And so if you have a young girl like I do, and you watch lots of kids' shows, although thankfully that's ending, there is a very, very common refrain in songs, in movies, in TV shows, and it goes, just believe in yourself. You have it within you, Just believe in yourself. You're special. You can do it. All you need is, and don't need someone else's approval. I think as Beth Ann grows up, I don't particularly want her to grow up thinking that, which sounds horrible, but it is true. I think it's a lie. I think it is like sort of true. It's half true, but it's not enough true to actually get her to understand the world the way that it is. Okay, the next thing our culture says we need for success or whatever, self-sufficiency. If I spelled that right. This is the idea that we should work hard, that we should not be dependent on others for XYZ, that we should have a job, that we should work, that we should do our fair share, that one of the things that makes us a success is that we are not needy, right? There's a big drive in our culture to not be needy. And again, it's not like there's nothing true about that. It's not like in the Bible there's nothing negative to be said about laziness, for instance, or spending all of your time or energy or money on entertaining yourself. Like, these are things the Bible doesn't think are good. And so the idea that we ought to be productive, that we ought to stand on our own feet, that we ought to not be needy, it's not like none of that is true. But even saying it like that makes me cringe a little. You know, being self-sufficient, growing up to think that you don't need other people is a little insane if you think about the way that God made us and the biblical story. It doesn't really talk to Christians and say, you need to be more independent. And I also put, like, or citizen or neighbor. Now, being a good neighbor is literally in the Bible, but it's this idea that you need to contribute to the common good in some way, right? Like, if someone, like, don't be a jerk is maybe a better way of describing it. That the way that you can be a successful, accomplished person, the way that you can succeed in life is to just not be a jerk to everyone, right? As long as you're like a good person, like you don't like push people into mud, that is sort of a pathway to accomplishing what you know who you need to be in life. And again, there's not everything about that is wrong, but it's so vague. It's such a vague idea, and why? Like, there are lots of people who are content fitting into the system, like not in a bad way, but like in a they're not making waves. They're not like burning things down. You know, they want to cooperate. They're cooperative. I'm not that person. I'm whatever the opposite of cooperative is. That's me. And so when someone tells me do this or don't do this, I say, why? Like, you act as if you have this authority to tell me what to do. Like, if you don't have a good reason for me to do the thing you're telling me to do, then why would I listen to you? I don't assume that people who tell me what to do somehow deserve to be obeyed. Like, that's not an assumption I was born with or maybe raised with or who knows what. All I know is that I've always questioned that. And to me, this seems like such a vague thing that I just say, why? Like, okay, people don't like to get pushed into mud puddles. Like, I get it. But, like, why does that matter to me? If you don't have a reason why you should be a good person, it's really just up to whatever you feel like at the moment is being a good person, right? We have these conversations in our culture about how complicated the problems are, right? Even just in America, how complicated justice is, how complicated these issues are, and how difficult they are to agree on, much less fix, right? And a big part of that is that everyone has a different idea of what being a good person is. Now, some of these things in various ways our church, Delta, struggle with, but a lot of them we don't, right? A lot of things we, as a culture in our church, we're not really tempted to take those things too far. And so I was thinking, what kind of favoritism do we get tempted by at Delta? What kinds of what would lead us to give someone a seat of honor, right? Apparently, yes, it is leg muscles is what does it. Yeah, there you go. Or height, you know. But he had it within himself to win. What's the problem? Okay, anyway, because this is a little bit of an aside, but it turns out things, even like being rich, is not entirely up to you. Not that it's not up to you at all, but it's not entirely up to you. Sometimes it's just random chance, or what appears to us to be random chance, that gives you a leg up to accomplish those things. It's why I thought of the first world problems. The reason why we can argue about some of the things we spend time arguing about is because we're not just trying to eat enough to survive. We have the luxury of having food. And that means that we have a lot more time to, argue with each other, apparently. Okay, so who are we as a church tempted to favor? I think in our church in particular, education is a big thing. The reason I say tempted is because I don't think these are things that are viewed in the Bible as things to favor. But just as things in the culture have a grain of truth, it's not like education is an evil thing that we should run away from, right? But we tend in our church's culture, we tend to be people who have a way higher percentage of people who have college degrees, right, than the wider society, like way higher. We also kind of favor people who are Bible educated, right? A lot of us have undergrad degrees from Great Lakes. Some of us have further degrees in the Bible. And again, I'm not saying that being educated in the Bible is somehow a bad thing. What I'm saying is that we might be tempted to honor people who have those things more than they ought to be, right? Is it great that Riley has the height that he has? Well, sometimes if there's a pot that needs to be reached on a top shelf, welcome to Erica's life, it's good that he's tall for certain things, right? But it ought to have the advantages that it deserves and not kind of be blown out of proportion and now he gets a special seat in a fancy necklace? I don't know. Anyway. A second thing that we're tempted to favor is people that we share interests with. We're all messed up about how to make friends because we have the luxury of not having to talk to people who live by us. Like, we have the luxury of transportation, of working half an hour away from where we live. We have the luxury of choosing who to be our friends with. In different circumstances in history, that luxury is gone. You don't choose who's in your village. And that's it. That's all you got. Those are your friends. And so it is nonetheless something that we have a hard time with. And when we base our time spent but it's not like everything about that's bad, right? It is often a way to begin friendships. It's often a way to get to know people. I can't meet all of the people in my neighborhood and form great friendships with all of them. But some of the people who cross my path, I can. And another that we as a church are tempted to favor is people who aren't bad people. I started working at a construction company with people, and one of the things I encountered is this idea that some of my coworkers would come to my church, and I think it was described as walk in the door and be struck by lightning, which is interesting because the door's our house. Like, what door are you talking about? But it centered around at times it's centered around swearing and having tattoos. That these are apparently the things that would make us shun them, if they met people in my church. And we have a tendency to not want don't smoke. People who don't heavily drink, right? These are the people that fit into our nice church's, microculture. But even though there's truth in some of that, it's not like our church wants to promote drunkenness. It's not like our church wants to have our kids around every type of behavior that exists in the world, right? There is some truth to it, but we are tempted to take it too far, to where we are closed off from people who don't fit that mold, and are unwelcoming to them. Now, Paul deals with this favoritism issue quite a bit in some of the things that he encounters in churches. Now, he comes at it from two different directions, and so I'd like to read the two directions. One is, if the mark of a good God follower or a good Christian, although he doesn't use those words, if there are characteristics of a good Christian, he competes with that. He says, you say you're a good Christian, I'm a better one. And he sort of exposes how ridiculous it is to think those things are somehow great. And then the other way he does it is by boasting not about his qualifications, but about things that don't sound all that wonderful to brag about. So the first one is 2 Corinthians. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and have been exposed to death again and again. There's more. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak, and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. And if you read his story in Acts, it's possible that he had more suffering than most anyone else in terms of for Christ. A laundry list of all sorts of things. Flogged, beaten with canes, and shipwrecked multiple times, and imprisoned, and all of those things. Eventually killed. He's dealing with people who are saying, Paul isn't even that great of a guy. Like, why are you trusting his authority? And he's saying, I'll tell you where if they want to say I'm not enough of an authority to listen to, let me tell you what I would brag about. How many times have they been beaten? Oh, 25? I'm 26. And the problem is, in order to win that battle, you have to be the one at the top, right? Like, only one person wins that contest, the person who has the most. And if God welcomes all people in, how can it possibly be that only one person counts enough? Only one person is the most honorable, right? It doesn't really make sense to view things that way in the church. There's another passage in Philippians. If someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee. As for zeal, persecuting the church. As for righteousness, based on the law, faultless. But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I've lost all things. I consider them garbage, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ Jesus, the righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. Church as a professor. He was very, very well educated in the Bible, and he preached or led in the church his entire life, right? His entire adult life. So just my last name sort of gets me in certain doors. I did not have parents that divorced. I did not grow up in a family where they taught me bad things. I was raised in a Christian. I speak the Christianish language. So they don't have problems with me standing up here and speaking that some people might have if I was a woman. In addition to that, I have the personal flaw of not being embarrassed by attention. And so I'm outspoken. And so it's easy for me to slide into places with not very much friction. I don't have the trouble of needing a space made for me to speak my mind. I don't have that trouble. It's not a struggle I've ever had. My problem is I squeeze my way into too many places, right? But I don't need someone to speak for me, right? Because I'm always going to shove my way in and speak for myself. I have privilege in our culture, our small culture. But how many of those things that I listed are just random chance? Or what we call random chance. They certainly weren't chosen by me. I had no say in whether I would be born or not. Like, unless I can time travel, I literally couldn't give my opinion. And so why would I get privilege of the kinds that we've talked about? Why would I get favoritism for those things that I didn't even do, much less choose? I think that one of the things that the New Testament makes clear, most clear in Christ, but clear in a lot of other places, is what are the things that are worth honoring in the body? What are the things we ought to strive for? What are the things that we ought to respect and give authority to? And there's lots of places to go for this, but we'll go to part of James, in James chapter 3. James really likes this wisdom thing, by the way. Here's why this is the way he says it. The wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So what would James have us learn from the verses, some of which we didn't even read, that are about favoritism, that are about privilege, and how it ought to work in the church? What would he have us, Delta, today learn? There are a few things, but one of the words in that list that really sticks out to me is the submissive. That's not a word that has the nicest connotations in our culture right now. To submit. But this is some of what submission means to me in our context. If God says to be part of his family, you should be baptized, is that we do things that we don't think is necessary, but that God says is necessary. The second thing that we can do is repent. God is not impressed by our efforts. Like, I'm sorry, Riley, but jumping that high is probably not going to get you into the Olympics. Because only one person gets the gold medal, right? It's not you, sorry. God's not impressed by all of these things that we do, all of who we are. God's not impressed, right? That's not why he thinks we're valuable. And what he values more than people who have it all together is people who are willing to turn away from things that have distracted from who God wants us to be. And then the third thought I have about submission is to confront each other. If it is an honorable thing in the church to submit to God, one of the instructions he gives is to confront one another about sin. There are reasons why, right? There are things in the Bible that talk about how and why we ought to do that. But at the end of the day, he says to do it. And if we're going to honor each other in the church in ways that are good and not in ways that are arbitrary, random, and damaging, we should honor submission to God, where we don't make things happen on our own, but we just try to do what God asks us to do. God does not honor people for never making mistakes. God does honor people for repenting, for confessing, for confronting, for becoming obedient. And so, what James has to say, or some of what James has to say about favoritism is, if you're going to give someone the seat of honor, make sure that it's for the right reasons. Make sure that it's for the reasons that God cares about. Let's pray. God, thank you for showing us a way to live where we might be able to live with one another and honor you and be part of what you're doing in the world. We just thank you so much for the things that you've given us. Please help us to let go of the privileges and the honor that hold us back from accepting what you say is good. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Church differently than a lot of churches. One of them is that this Sunday service that we all gather together is the little part of how we do life together, not the big part that a lot of churches make it. So because of that, we also use time at the end of the service to talk about the other part of church that we do together. And there's a lot of it this week. I'm the announcements guy, and there's a whole list of them, which is why I had to write them down on my phone. Sorry. Well, now it's secret. Actually, it's on. She joined our group officially. Yeah, it's very exciting. And so we're going to have a party about that because we like to have parties together. That's going to be May 30th at the Vance's house on Thursday evening. So our branch is going to celebrate with her and with everybody else that wants to come. It's going to be a cookout. Our ranch is going to cover like meat and drinks and some sides and stuff. And if you want to come and bring some stuff to help everybody be allowed to eat things that are yummy, then you can do that. And if you want to come and you don't have anything to bring, that's okay too. But that'll be at, we are going to be making some changes to our Sunday morning classes that happen at 9:30 for the summer. Right? We're not meeting next week, right? Those classes aren't, because a lot of the people involved in that are going to be traveling for Memorial Day and stuff. And then, is it just one more week of those classes or not at all? It's done. So especially the younger ones, the younger kids, are going to be done for the summer of those classes. Older kids are still meeting? Yeah, so the older ones are still meeting, and the adult class will still be meeting at 9:30. As we were discussing that, John noted that we talked about it together, and if you don't have anything else to learn about God or Scripture as an adult, or how to live the way we should in the kingdom, then you don't have to come. But otherwise, you can teach it if you've got it all figured out, or if you have some stuff to learn. This is the place in our group right now where deep dive Bible study is happening for adults. So we strongly encourage you to come at 9:30 on Sunday mornings to participate in that. We are having a church life meeting in 2 weeks, June 2nd. It'll be here at the time that we would normally meet at 9:30 till about 12:30. We were going to eat afterwards. So you just might want to let people know that if they're not a regular part of the church yet, or if they're a visitor. They are still welcome to come, but it'll be weird compared to other regular weirdness that we normally have together. So,
Can I go back?
Yes, sir.
There will be childcare
Okay.
at the Doty Center that week, so it's
Right.
going to be different than our normal church life meeting. We're encouraging everybody to be able to make it if possible.
That's a great point. There will be childcare, and a note from me about that meeting. I've sent out emails before about making signs for the service. Hopefully we'll have some sign options to show you at that meeting. So if you are one of the people that's creative and likes to do that kind of stuff, have me something by then. There's kickball this week, 6 o'clock tomorrow night. Lots of fun will be happening. Also, John and Ryan are taking up the burden of going to Hawaii. And as part of that, we're going to be encouraging a group of believers out there that are kind of trying to do kingdom life together the way we do, or at least emphasizing some of the things that we do. And we want to encourage them. The leadership team talked about a card, but cards are disposable and they're not very durable. And so instead, we've got a copy of John's book that we're going to sign, write encouraging notes, possibly highlight stuff out of that book that you find encouraging. If you're one of the less cool people like Tom or I that haven't read the book yet, you can still write in it. It's okay. It's just a more substantive way of sending a note than a card would be. So don't let your literacy level hold you back from encouraging those believers in Hawaii, right? That's all of the ones that are on my list. Is there any other announcements? Delta Mills, says John Rosenberg. So that's the one over here, right? I think we're all done then. So you're dismissed and have a good time.
Let's go.